This is an audio recording of Kensington Effect, written by Drinking Bear, as read by the Drinking Bear, with accompaniment from the Bard. Gather. Chapter 2.
The feathered girl, Ashley, narrowed her eyes on Megan. Folding her hands together, she tilted her head to the side. Show and tell? Our Kensington effects? She was quiet. Had they not been in such desolate, ill-used space, her voice may have been swallowed by everyday sounds. Yeah, Megan beamed, standing up from her chair. What better way to get to know each other than to show off our powers? Lionel coughed, stifling a little laugh as he looked up to Bobby and Marina.
You're joking, right? After years of us reading literature about how our powers are supposed to be kept quiet and not shown in public, like they were trying to shame us in the same way you might do nudity?
He shook his head a bit and crossed his arms over his chest.
You gotta be joking. I mean, that's like asking me to show my dick to a bunch of strangers.
As the surrounding girls turned their gazes on Lionel with varying degrees of incredulity, he blushed and turned his eyes toward the ground.
I just mean, as an example, you know? It's like, we've always been told, even before we got our powers, that this is like a private thing.
Bobby nodded in agreement. Yeah, this has been a subject of shame since long before any of us wound up developing an effect. They even pulled those old videos from the 50s and 60s out of storage closets at my school to show us because I was in the class that would have been close to the middle of the time the comet passed this time. There's expected to be more of us in my year and the following 2 years than any other, so they made that a big fucking point. Megan scoffed. She stepped toward the middle of the group. Well, I think that's dumb. There's no reason we should be ashamed of what we got. There's no reason for us to have to hold this shit inside of us. It's bullshit. Marina looked around at the others and stammered a reply. Yeah, I mean, she isn't wrong, right? Everyone was staring at her now, except for Ashley, who found something to stare at on the ground where she circled the toe of her shoe. Undaunted, Megan stood up straight, her hands moving to rest on her hips. Well, that's how I think anyway. There's no reason for any of us to hide this stuff. Not from each other, at least. I mean, if there's anyone in the world it should be okay to share what we're going through with, it should be other people who have gone through the same shit. Hell, I'll even go first, if that's what it takes to get you bunch of party poopers in the right spirit. All eyes were on her. She looked to each of them in turn, half-heartedly hoping someone else would volunteer to go first, or at least go with her. When no one else said anything, Megan sighed and moved back toward one of the LED lights placed behind her. Okay, she said, fixing her eyes across the room. She closed her eyes for a moment and nothing seemed to happen. Shit, never really done this with people, watching before. So, Megan stammered a little, screwing her eyes shut once more. After a moment of further concentration, her body vanished from sight, a wafting silhouette of purplish smoke dropping to the ground and breaking apart where she had been. A quiet, high-pitched noise like a distant animal screeching came from behind the group, drawing their attention. Megan stood with her arms folded, a cheeky grin on her face. Teleportation? Ashley spoke up. That's so cool! That kind of explains you not being from here. You could potentially port in from somewhere else. Lionel nodded.
No kidding. And, well, that answers the questions I had about that. Excepting, of course, where you're actually from.
Lionel's chair disappeared from under him and appeared up in the air above the lamps in a burst of churning smoke amidst a brief screech of sound. Lionel fell on his backside and grunted loudly, about to speak before he saw the chair dropping down from above. As it fell down, it disappeared again, only to appear on the ground and then skitter across it as if it had still been falling, before ultimately tipping over. Megan stepped over to Lionel and extended her hand to him, helping him up to his feet. Sorry, I just, She cleared her throat, stopping her apology to speak instead. I can teleport. Myself, objects, other people, and when I do, whatever I teleport maintains its velocity. That's why the chair still thumped into the ground and fell over, even though I teleported it back to the ground. Lionel grimaced slightly.
That would mean that if you're already fallen, teleporting wouldn't necessarily save you.
Yeah, Megan grinned sheepishly. Tried that out a bit when I was getting the hang of it. Teleporting while hopping between walls. Went a bit too far and started to fall. I teleported down to the ground thinking I wouldn't need to brace for impact because my feet would already be on the ground. Messed up my ankle pretty bad that day.
Probably better you found out that way instead of, say, teleporting in or out of a moving vehicle.
Megan's eyes widened a bit at that prospect. Yikes. Yeah, that would probably be a really bad idea. She looked back at the toppled chair. On the flip side, though, I can change an object's orientation when I teleport it. To demonstrate, the fallen chair disappeared briefly, reappearing in almost the exact same spot, but in an upright position. So, pretty cool, right? Who wants to go next? Ashley stepped up. The pale girl with the feathers didn't say anything. She looked around at the others for a moment and then closed her black eyes. Cupping her hands in front of her, she breathed out slowly, a quiet whirl of air fluttering at her feathers. Her breath fogged the air, slowly coalescing into a ball between her hands. The others stepped a little closer, cautiously. The ball of fogged air tightened between her cupped hands, and slowly, with crisp, crackling sounds, shrunk into a ball much denser. In almost an instant, a ball of spiked ice formed in her hands. Then it spiked out in 5 directions. The ball of ice grew legs, arms, a rounded head. A moment later, Ashley held a roughly humanoid figure of ice in her hands, and she opened her eyes. As the others looked into her hands in the pale light of the lamps, she saw that they carried not fear, but awe. Not at all like how her parents had reacted when she'd first started to change. Ashley smiled a little and held her hands palm up. The legs of the ice doll began to turn and carry it into a rough, jerking dance over her hands. I can breathe out air that's pretty far below ice cold. She was quiet, but not the near whisper she had spoken in earlier. Turning her eyes from the others, she watched her dancing ice sculpture. And I can shape the movement of cold exuded from other sources. By doing it quickly, I can make a roughly animated ice sculpture, but it's more like stop motion. I don't really make it move, just the shape and the extreme fields of cold into little tendrils while breaking it off in other places and... She stopped, her cheeks reddening deeply as she shook out her hands, letting the ice form dash to the ground in a spatter of snowflakes. She stopped up short and clutched a hand to her mouth, turning herself away from the others. I can also see heat signatures. Everyone is unique to me, and it gets easy to see where people have been or passed by recently. Well, if there aren't a lot of people going through the area. Megan, Lionel, and Marina smiled to Ashley, giving her an appreciative round of claps, which only caused her to blush further. After a moment, she murmured a quiet, "Thank you," and returned to her chair, as did everyone else. Bobby, rounding up into a standing position, picked up the chair she had been sitting on. Okay. If the shy girl can do it, then I got no excuses. She gave a quiet grunt and folded her chair in half, backwards, from the way it was meant to be folded. She let the ruined chair drop to the ground. First off, I'm ridiculously strong. Once she had their attention, Bobby resisted the urge to smirk. She lifted a hand and a globe of fire erupted above her palm. I can make fire, she went on, and then tossed the ball of flame to her left hand. Then it danced around from her hand, twisting and flickering back and forth before it began to circle around her into a hoop of flame. And I can manipulate fire near me, making it do as I please, enhancing its intensity. She let the flame hoop flare out, bursting brightly and sending waves of intense heat for only a moment before it winked out of existence, leaving her with sweat on her brow. Or I can extinguish it completely.
That's pretty impressive,
Lionel murmured, arms crossed over his chest. Bobby shot him a grin. That's not all, she said, reaching into her coat and producing a switch knife. She let the blade click out and rolled up the left sleeve of her jacket. Without a word, she took the knife in her right hand, set her left hand down on top of one of the folding card tables, and dropped the knife toward her hand. The others around her gasped out or let out half-spoken cries of protest or alarm. When the tip of the blade struck the back of her hand, however, it simply bounced off and clattered onto the table. The others closed in to take a look. When they turned their eyes up to her face, she shrugged. I saw a video on non-Newtonian fluids once. My skin kind of works like that, I think. She let the blade drop onto the back of her hand, and again, it bounced off without effect, save for a small red dot at the point of impact. When something hits hard, it just kind of bounces off. I was scared when it first started that I'd be found out when I had to get my vaccinations for the year, but the needle pushed in without a problem. To demonstrate, Bobby pressed the tip of the blade against her skin and dragged it slowly, barely a quarter of an inch, and blood beaded up around the place the blade passed. Slow, steady pressure still pierces like normal skin, but sudden impacts and strikes are buffered, which is nice because it keeps my skin from splitting if I end up hitting something with my strength. Of course, I'm usually pretty careful about that. Megan tilted her head slightly, yellowy eyes narrowing on the cut on Bobby's arm. That is so cool! Marina cleared her throat and smiled. Well, I guess that's a good segue into what I do. The big part, at least. Before anyone could ask, she put a bare finger on the small cut on Bobby's arm. With a swipe of that fingertip, the wound on Bobby's arm was gone, covered over with pink new tissue. It looked like it had already had at least a day to heal and scab over. Bobby shivered slightly as the contact ended, lifting her eyes to stare at Marina. Sorry, Marina shrugged sheepishly. The effect can give a sort of creepy, crawly sensation as it does its thing. At least, when I used it on myself, it feels like ants crawling under my skin. Clearing her throat, she went on and straightened up. The long and short of it is that my Kensington effect lets me affect the speed of healing and recovery, instead of taking months or years for the healing process to complete with cycles and cycles of processes and using new materials. My power makes the wounded area pull in dead tissue, spilled blood, and so on, and recycles it to go through hundreds of cycles of the healing process in instants rather than years, or something like that anyway. The other four in the group were dumbfounded. Marina squirmed under their gaze and took a step back from the group. That and I can apparently shift my age back and forth by a few years, but it's nothing to write home about. I mean, looking a little older or younger isn't really an interesting power, you know? Fair enough, Doc. Megan smiled, moving over to the table before she tossed a bag of chips towards Marina. And that just leaves... Lionel sighed and looked over to Bobby for a moment, before he looked to Marina, Ashley, and then Megan. Turning his gaze toward the lamp, he shook his head and closed his eyes.
242 ACI.
Lionel spoke, drawing a curious quirk of the brow from Bobby.
August 21st. Subject, Empowered Meetup, EMU. Posted by Shadow Batto Bobato. Hey guys, if there's any empowered near Phoenix, Arizona, I found this factory outside the I-74. That ought to be just right for a nice quiet place to...
Wait, was that word for word my original forum post about today's meetup? Megan shifted slightly, tilting her head askew. He turned toward Ashley and Marina.
Maroon, Saturn. Rusting around the passenger side rims on the fires, small crack along the underside of windshield, no antenna, though there is a spot for it. License plate number MM2446, 2 passengers. Driver has black hair and...
Wait, are you describing me? Marina spoke up, taking a look toward Ashley, then widening her eyes. That's my car's plate number! Lionel nodded, letting his eyes open as he looked toward the others.
I have a perfect memory. Absolutely everything I've ever seen, heard, or otherwise experienced, I can recall in perfect detail. Well, all the things after my effect manifested, and in no uncertain terms, I'm a genius. I graduated from the Avalon Academy for the Gifted in Tucson last year, earning my high school diploma.
Lionel interrupted her.
I've been enrolled in college classes since March, and I'm working closely with the BEA agencies to gain a working role within their ranks, or among the UNDF once I'm 18. I'm not just bragging when I say that I'm a genius. I even remember every single person I've pissed off by saying so. Sorry if I offended you.
The rest of them were suddenly quiet. The revelation of a perfect memory among them while illegally displaying their powers and connected to the authorities was a sobering moment that made them all feel tense. His sunken brown eyes gazing over each of the girls in turn, Lionel suddenly lifted a hand to the back of his neck.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have higher logical capacity, but I'm still not great with people, which is part of why I'm here. It only just now occurred to me that by saying all that, I might look like I'm suddenly revealing that I'm a cop and this was a trap or sting or something.
The others still didn't seem that at ease, and he grimaced.
Okay, well, I have one more thing. Not a lot of people know about this yet, so I'm embarrassed to show this one. Technically, I haven't registered this either. Took a while before I even realized I could do it.
He rolled up the left sleeve of his jacket, his right hand moving to run his thumb and forefinger around on the flesh of his forearm.
I wasn't really ready for this, so don't expect a whole lot. But, here we go.
Something caught on the edge of Lionel's finger, and he pinched with his thumb and forefinger. Without a sound, he pulled, and something slid out of his skin, as if being pulled out of a vat of viscous fluid. A moment later, he held up a small, almost spherical object in his hand. Holding it up to the light, he showed them a round-edged, 20-sided die, complete with engraved numbers on its 20 facets.
I have the ability to make things,
Lionel said, placing the die down on the table in the middle of the room.
As long as it's solid and all a singular connected piece, I can pull it out of my body. So far, I've been able to make something that's about 1.5 pounds. Typically, they don't last, collapsing into nothing after about 5 hours, although some have gone as long as about 21 days. With some concentrated effort, I could make things that are more permanent. Even that isn't perfect, though, but the drawback of this process is that making more than a little at a time is physically taxing in the extreme.
And with a perfect memory to recognize designs, sizes, and intricate details, Marina spoke, you could replicate some pretty interesting things. Lionel nodded to her.
It took me months to be able to create all the pieces, mostly due to hard limit on my ability, but my computer at home was all homemade. Every single bit and bob 3D printed out of my own bod.
That's weird, Bobby smirked, but also really cool. Ashley walked over to the table and picked up the die that Lionel had made. Interesting choice to make a die like that, she said, her eyes turning toward him. He shrugged.
Well, even before I had my Kensington effect, I liked role-playing games. I haven't been able to play it much since I started hammering my way through high school tests and whatnot, but I finally started to relax a little. Spaced out my college classes and stuff.
Ashley smiled, rolling the die around in the palm of her hand. I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons since before my Kensington effect changed me. You know, things got kind of bad with other kids, so I dropped out. Haven't left my house much since then. No shit, Bobby said, stepping up toward Ashley. Haven't had much luck finding a group at my school here, but back when I lived in Burbank, my old friends used to get together and play every other Saturday. Marina looked at Bobby, Lionel, and Ashley. You guys are all really that nerdy? I've never played it, but I always thought it sounded kind of neat, Megan chimed in. Wasn't really a popular thing among my old group of friends before I started doing online classes. Totally feel you on that front, Ash. Ashley gave a bashful shrug and glanced over to Megan. Yeah, kids can be pretty cruel, even if the schools tout on about having a zero-tolerance policy about bullying. Lionel chuckled, looking around the group.
Hey, I don't suppose you guys are thinking what I am, are you?
Marina folded her arms over her chest. I guess you're going to include me in this, then?
Hell yeah, I am,
he answered.
I mean, aside from being a nice little distraction and something to feel a little more, well, normal, I guess, it's not a bad way to get to know other people. The way a person plays says a lot about them.
You're saying you want to throw together a D&D group, then? Bobby blinked, one hand unconsciously lifting to pat the pocket where her cigarettes were. Why not? Megan grinned. I'm down for learning how to play if at least one of you three is patient enough to show me the ropes. Marina sighed. Sure, same as Megan here. If someone's willing to kind of hold my hand while I get the hang of it, I'm willing to give it a try. But I'm not making any promises. Bobby pulled her pack of cigarettes from her pocket and tapped one out for herself. She put it to her mouth, a flame wicked across the back of her hand to light it. Alright, sounds good. I'll have some free time Wednesday night if you guys want to set something up. I can show you the classes and walk you through making a character. Awesome! Megan couldn't have been grinning any wider. She was so excited that the meeting had worked out, that she was making new friends. How about when we all meet for it? Would Saturday be good? Bobby shook her head. I'll be working this Saturday. Next Saturday would be alright, though. Lionel nodded.
Same. I got an interview with some kind of BEA guys who want me to talk about my ability and data retention before I'm allowed to go anywhere near their facilities. So, you know, kind of important for me. But yeah, next Saturday would be good.
Megan looked to Ashley and Marina. Sound good to you two? Ashley nodded a little, holding her hands up together under her chin. Yeah, totally. If Marina can't get time to see Bobby teaching her, I can try. We found out we live on the same block, Marina added. We've been using the forum to chat a bit, and I've been to Ashley's house once. I even drove her out here for this, so yeah, I think we can make this stuff work. Lionel gave a quick nod.
Cool. I'll get to work on something for the game then.
The 5 teens spoke a bit longer, exchanging phone numbers, eating the snacks, and drinking the sodas Megan had brought. Nearly an hour later, they departed the abandoned factory, with plans for a more legitimate meeting almost 2 weeks from the day. Bobby watched as Ashley got into Marina's car, and the two of them drove away. Lionel got into a Lincoln Town car parked near the loading dock and drove off a short time later, leaving Megan and Bobby standing together by the back entrance of the factory. Bobby was just finishing the last cigarette from her pack before dropping it onto the ground and stepping it out. She glanced over to Megan, who was dragging a plastic garbage bag behind her, the remainders of their meeting. Hey, thanks for setting this up, Megan, Bobby said, starting off toward her car. There's not really people I trust to talk to about my effect, so it's been a big weight off my chest. No problem, Megan grinned. I'll text you later about when you can teach me that gaming stuff. Bobby chuckled. As long as it isn't after 10 p.m. I swear my mom has the ears of a fox, and she gets upset if I'm using my phone or on my computer that late. She moved off toward her car and waved behind her back. See you around, Blue. Megan pursed her lips slightly as Bobby got into her car. She didn't like being called that, but she didn't want to start anything after everything else had gone so well. She could vent her frustration or tell Bobby it made her uncomfortable later. There was going to be later this time, so it was okay. Minutes passed, and Megan just sat, watching the sun starting to set in the west. To her perception, the sun winked up to a higher position in the sky as she appeared in her bedroom, looking out the window toward the sunset. She moved over to the window, hauling the bag of garbage through it as she opened it and let it drop down into the trash bin below. Bullseye! She grinned, shutting the window and heading toward her bed, phone already in hand. A day well spent, with a perfect end.
End of Chapter 2.